Arizona Territory. 1882. The sun was only just clawing its way over the jagged mountains when the stagecoach door flew open and Magnolia Zeller tumbled out like a storm loosed from the sky. "I told you I do not whisper," Magnolia shouted back at the startled driver, her voice echoing off the red rock walls of the small town of Dry Creek. A few townsfolk turned to stare. The blacksmith paused his hammer. The saloon doors swung open slow, revealing a barkeep mid-polish. No one said a word, but their eyes said plenty. Too loud, too much, too wild. Magnolia adjusted her skirt with a huff, brushing off the Arizona dust. Her dark curls were half-pinned, half-wild, and her sun-brown skin glistened with sweat already. She had a suitcase in one hand, a battered guitar case in the other, and more opinions than most folks could stomach. She had come to Dry Creek because it was the last place on her list, and she had nowhere else left to go. Truth was, she had already tried quieter. She had tried proper and polite. But Magnolia Zeller had a voice like thunder and a laugh like it could wake the dead, and people always made sure she knew it. "They told me I was too loud to love," she muttered under her breath, chin high. "Well, they can go to hell." She did not notice the cowboy watching her from across the street. He leaned against the hitching post outside the livery, arms crossed, hat tipped low to block the early light. He had eyes the color of split cedar and a face carved by time and silence. The kind of man who said little because he had seen too much. His name was Yates Vardon, and he had not smiled in years. When she crossed the street marching like thunder, he did not look away. "You look like you just got dropped here by a dust storm," he said. Magnolia blinked at him. "And you look like you have not spoken in a week." "Maybe I have not." She set her suitcase down and narrowed her eyes. "Well, I hope you are not one of those quiet types who think silence is some kind of virtue. I have had enough of men who act like speaking their mind is a sin." Yates straightened. "It is not quiet that makes a man good. It is quiet that kills me." That stopped her. She stared at him, her quick tongue stilled for just a moment. His voice had not been sharp or mocking. It had been real, heavy. "Good," she said finally. "Then we will get along just fine." They met again 2 days later. Magnolia had taken a job cleaning rooms at the boarding house, though she had her eye on the saloon stage. She wanted to sing again, had not sung in months, but the owner, a man named Briggs, said she was not what the patrons were used to. She knew what that meant. Too much voice. Too much everything. Yates came in quiet as always. He worked trail stock and broke horses for the army, kept to himself. But that morning, Magnolia caught him helping a boy fix a broken wheel on a cart, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands steady. The boy, maybe 8 or 9, had wild blonde hair and a stubborn chin. "Your son?" she asked later, when Yates passed her by the well. "No, not by blood. But I am the one who stayed." She studied him. "What happened to his folks?" "His mother died when he was 6. His father left 2 winters after. Could not take the grief." "And you could." Yates looked at her then, eyes hard and tired. "I did not have the choice." She was quiet for once. Then, gently, "What is his name?" "Cullen." He said it with care, like the boy was more than just another mouth to feed. Like he was the reason Yates got out of bed in the morning. That night, Magnolia sang. She did not wait for permission. She marched into the saloon, dust on her boots and fire in her blood, and took the stage with her guitar. The room fell silent when she opened her mouth. Her voice was not soft. It was not sweet. It was full and fierce and alive. Yates was there. She saw him near the back, not drinking, just listening. His eyes never left her. When she walked off the stage, breathless and lit up from the inside, he was waiting. "I have never heard anything like that," he said. "Most folks say that like it is a bad thing. I do not." She looked at him, heart thudding. You mean that? I do. They stood close now. Too close for strangers. Not close enough for what she wanted. You are not afraid of me? She asked. No. Even if I talk too much? I want to keep hearing you. Her voice caught. Why? Because I have had enough of quiet that says nothing. I want the kind that means something. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing hers. She laced hers through his, and just like that, something shifted. He brought her to the ranch 2 days later. Cullen was shy at first, but Magnolia knelt in the dirt beside him and said, You ever heard a guitar up close? And just like that, they were fast friends. She sang while he did chores. She told stories while he fixed the fence. And Yates watched her with something like wonder in his eyes. One evening after supper, when Cullen had gone to bed, Magnolia sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest. You know, she said, eyes on the stars. I spent so long trying to be quiet enough for someone to love me, but I cannot do it. It is not who I am. I do not want you quiet. She looked at him. He moved beside her, close but not pushing. I want you loud. I want the whole storm. I want the fire and the wind and your voice filling every room. She blinked, tears catching in her throat. You sure? I have never been more sure of anything. And when he kissed her, it was slow, steady, like he had been waiting to breathe for years and finally could. The moon was high, the desert wind soft against their skin, and Magnolia Zeller too loud, too fierce, too much was finally loved exactly as she was. The summer pushed deeper into August. Dry Creek cracked under the sun's weight, brittle and gold. The air thick with mesquite and the slow churn of cattle drives. Mornings arrived with a hush and left with the sound of boots and wagon wheels. Magnolia rose with the first birds and swept the boarding house steps before the dust could settle too thick. In the evenings, she rode out to Yates's ranch, Cullen often waiting at the gate before she even reached it. That afternoon, she found him crouched near a fence post, frowning at a snapped wire. Didn't hold after the rain, he muttered, pulling the strand free with one hand. Might have had a weak twist. Magnolia knelt beside him, the hem of her skirt catching on a nail head. You want me to hold it while you fix it? He glanced at her, quiet for a second, then nodded. Wrap your hand in this. He handed her a strip of old canvas. It'll bite otherwise. She did as told, and together they worked in rhythm, him twisting, her holding, neither speaking for a stretch of minutes. The silence didn't press between them like it once might have. It felt companionable, the kind that had weight without needing words. Where'd you learn fence work? He asked eventually, not looking up. My uncle raised sheep up in the hill country, she replied. Didn't trust me with the shears, so I got the chores nobody wanted. Fences, mostly. He gave a short nod, hand steady. They trust you now? She smiled faintly. Most folks don't get past the noise. They think being loud means I'm careless. You're not, he said, tying off the wire. You just don't hide. She blinked once. And you? I hide everything. The wind stirred up dust between them, catching in her throat. She swallowed hard. You ever think you'd want something different? He straightened and leaned against the post, arms folded. Didn't think I'd have the right to. Why not? I made peace with a life that didn't ask much of me. One that didn't give much either. And now, I see what else it could be. She stood, brushing her hands off on her apron. You mean with Cullen? His gaze held hers. I mean with you. The quiet stretched wide again, but it wasn't hollow. It filled her chest, made her ribs feel too tight. That night, Yates cooked over the fire behind the house. Cullen perched on an overturned bucket with a stick in hand, poking the flames. Magnolia hummed as she peeled potatoes, seated on a blanket beside them. The light flickered across her face, softening the sharpness of her cheekbones, catching on the edge of her smile. Cullen turned to her suddenly. You gonna stay? Magnolia paused, knife mid-cut. Stay where? Here. With us. Yates stilled across the fire. She looked at the boy. You want me to? He shrugged, but his ears turned red. I like it better when you're here. Something caught low in her throat. She looked to Yates, but he was watching Cullen, not her. He's never asked anyone that before, he said after a moment. Not even his schoolteacher. Magnolia set the knife down. I never really stayed anywhere before. Yates finally looked at her. What would it take? She reached for a tin cup, sipping slow before answering. Something worth staying for. He didn't press, just nodded once, like he understood what she hadn't said. Later, after Cullen was in bed, Magnolia stood at the fence line, arms folded, watching the dark stretch of land beyond. Yates came up beside her, quiet as always. I've been thinking, he said after a while. Maybe you could teach him music. She looked over. Cullen? He nodded. He doesn't say much to most folks, but he listens. Picks things up quick. She smiled. That'd be something. Yates's voice was low. And maybe you could teach me how to stay. She turned toward him fully, heart thudding. You think I know how? You stayed long enough to be missed. He stepped closer, the space between them smaller than breath. She could smell smoke on his shirt, dust on his skin, something steady in the way he waited. I've never belonged anywhere, she said, voice rough. Not really. Then let this be the first. When he kissed her again, it was slower than before, not cautious certain. Like he'd made a choice and meant to keep it. Her hands curled into his shirt, and she felt it then, not just the pull of him, but the ground under her feet. Place to land. Place to begin. The night was quiet, but not empty. And for the first time, Magnolia didn't want to fill it. The monsoon clouds rolled in low and slow, casting Dry Creek in a strange, copper-toned hush. Folks had been itching for rain, but when it came, it hit hard, slamming the clapboard buildings sideways, turning the dirt roads to syrup. Magnolia stood inside the barn with Cullen, watching the sky open like a wound. Storm's got a spine tonight, she said, one hand on her hip, the other steadying the lantern. You ever see lightning strike twice in the same place? Cullen shook his head, eyes fixed past the swinging barn doors. It will, she said softly. There's always something that pulls it back. He turned toward her, hesitant. You think it's dangerous to be loud in a storm? She squatted beside him, the hem of her dress soaked from her ride in. No storm ever asked permission to be heard, Cullen. Neither should you. From the back of the barn, Yates called out, You two mind stepping clear? Mule's got her leg caught under that yoke beam. Magnolia moved without thought, grabbing Cullen's hand and leading him toward the tack wall. Yates was already beside the animal, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, jaw clenched. She twist it? She asked, crouching beside him. He ran a hand along the animal's flank. No break. Might be luckier than we thought. She reached under the beam, steady and sure. Lift slow. I'll guide her leg. Rain hammered the roof above them as Yates lifted. The mule brayed once, but Magnolia's voice cut through the noise, low and firm. Easy now, girl. You're not alone. The moment passed, and the mule's legs slid free. She staggered upright, favoring the limb but standing. They stayed crouched, shoulder to shoulder, breath caught between them. Yates broke it first. I didn't expect you to come out in this. You think a little rain's enough to keep me away? He shook his head. Most people stay where it's dry when the sky looks like that. I never learned how to stay put. Cullen stepped forward, watching the mule chew hay, her sides still heaving. She gonna be all right? Yates nodded. She'll limp a few days. But she's strong. Magnolia stood and brushed off her skirt. So's this place. I've seen it in the way you fix things without speaking it out loud. He met her eyes. And I've seen it in the way you carry everything like it's not too heavy. She hesitated. It is, sometimes. Then I'll carry some of it, too. The silence between them didn't stretch, it settled. Like something built on purpose, not by accident. Later, when the rain thinned to a hush, Yates led her to the shed behind the house. He opened the door slow, revealing a rough-hewn table and 2 small chairs. Shelves lined with jars, some empty, some filled with dried herbs and seed packets. A cracked window looked out over the low ridge. I started this after my father passed, he said. Didn't know what to do with my hands. Figured I'd grow something. She stepped inside, drawn by the scent of earth and cedar. You built this. Every board. She ran her fingers along the edge of the table. What did you want to grow? He stepped in behind her, voice low. A place where something could stay rooted. I just didn't know who it'd be for. She turned to face him, eyes searching. And now, he didn't look away. I'd like it to be for us. Her breath caught not from surprise, but from how right it sounded. You sure? I watched you step into this place like you belonged. Not because you were quiet or careful, but because you didn't pretend to be anything else. She nodded slowly. I won't change. I don't want you to. She reached for his hand, folding it into hers. Then I'll stay. Outside, the rain softened into mist. The barn creaked, the mule shifting in the straw. Inside the shed, they stood still, the wind pushing against the walls but not quite getting in. Cullen's voice broke the quiet from the porch. Supper's burning. Magnolia laughed, and for the first time Yates did too low and rough, like it hadn't been used much. They shared one last look. A promise passed between them with no need for words. And when they stepped outside, the storm had passed. The cottonwoods along the creek had begun to yellow at the edges, and the fields behind Yates's house turned brittle with early autumn. The monsoon rains had passed, leaving the air sharper, the sky a deeper blue. Out in the pasture, the horses had taken to standing in the shade of the bluff before midday. Magnolia could feel the season shifting beneath her boots. She stood at the edge of the corral, arms resting across the top rail, watching Cullen coax a 2-year-old gelding into halter. The boy had grown steadier in the last weeks, his hands more certain, his brow less tight when things didn't go as planned. Magnolia didn't say it out loud, but she saw it plain. He was starting to trust his own voice. Yates approached from the side gate with a saddle blanket under one arm and a sliver of dry grass between his teeth. His steps were unhurried, boots kicking up dust that hung in the warm wind. That roan's gonna keep testing him, he said, nodding toward the gelding. He'll hold steady, Magnolia replied. He's got more grit than most men I've met. Yates gave a quiet sound of agreement, then leaned on the rail beside her. They stood that way for a while, looking out. The sun pressed down, but she didn't mind it. I got a letter from Tucson, he said after a bit. Veterinary man I know. Retiring. Wants someone to look after the stock contracts. She turned to him. You thinking of taking it? I was. Before. And now. He drew the grass stem from his mouth and looked down at it. It'd mean being gone a good part of the year. Riding out to copper camps, mining sites, cattle runs down south. That's not work you do unless you want distance, she said. He didn't look at her, but his voice stayed even. I don't want distance anymore. She shifted to face him fully. You telling me you'd walk away from what you built here? I'm saying I'd rather build something that holds all 3 of us. The wind caught the hem of her skirt, tugging it sideways. She studied him, the lines around his mouth, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed even now. She'd known men to make promises under pressure, but Yates never spoke unless he meant to carry something through. "I've been playing at the saloon after supper," she said. "Briggs offered me a regular night. Friday." He turned toward her. "That what you want? I want to sing when I choose, not when I'm told I'm good enough." "Then take it." "You sound awful certain." "I am." She hesitated. "If I'm standing up in front of all those people, they'll say things. About me. About you." He didn't flinch. "Let them." She was quiet, but only for a moment. "You always this sure?" "No. Not before you." Cullen called from the corral, breaking their gaze. "He's leading now." They turned together, watching the gelding move in a slow arc behind the boy. "He's good with them," Magnolia said. "He'll be better," Yates replied. "Time makes all the difference." That night, she walked from the stage to the back door of the saloon with her guitar slung over one shoulder and a handful of silver coins tucked into her apron. The crowd had been rougher than usual, but nobody shouted her down. A rancher's wife had even clapped along. It wasn't a roar of approval, but it wasn't silence either. Yates was waiting outside with a lantern in hand. He didn't say anything, just reached for her guitar and carried it as they walked down the alley toward the horses. "You waited," she said. "I always will." She didn't answer, just slipped her hand into his. It fit there like it had been waiting, like the space between his fingers had always been meant for hers. When they reached the house, Cullen was asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest. Magnolia set the coins on the mantel and draped a blanket over him. Yates leaned in the doorway, watching her. She turned. "I don't need a wedding dress or church bells. I just want to wake up where I'm known." "You are," he said. "Every day more." She crossed the room to him, placed her palm flat over his chest. "Then that's where I'll stay." He kissed her forehead, one hand at the small of her back. "There's no going back for me." She smiled against his collarbone. "Good." Outside, the crickets had taken up their slow song. The wind had calmed, and the night settled in without edge or worry. She wasn't trying to belong anymore. She did. By late October, the mesa turned pale gold and the air sharpened enough to carry scent from half a mile. Smoke from wood stoves, horses' sweat, the last of the sage drying on the line, everything crisped under the early frost. Magnolia had taken to wearing Yates's old work coat in the mornings, sleeves rolled twice, the wool worn soft at the collar. She stood out by the chicken coop with Cullen, showing him how to mend a latch with baling wire. His hands were red from the cold but steady, his brow drawn in concentration. "You think come spring we can add more hens?" he asked. "Maybe some that lay blue eggs like Mrs. Weaver's got." Magnolia tugged the wire tight with a twist of her wrist. "We'll talk to Yates, see where the feed money's sitting. But I think blue eggs would suit this place." Cullen grinned and handed her the tin snips. "We could build a second pen. We'll make a plan. You draw it up. Show me where you'd put everything." He nodded, already thinking it through, and wandered off toward the shed with the dog trailing behind. Yates approached from the orchard where he'd been checking the apple trees. He had a half-filled basket in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. "You hear from Austin again?" Magnolia asked, brushing her palms clean. "They wired the final deed papers," he said. "House and land are fully cleared. No mortgage, no claims." She straightened, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. "So it's ours." He held out the folded page. "And they printed your name under mine." She took it slow, fingers brushing the newsprint, her throat tightening. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. You've put your hands on every part of this place. It's yours same as mine." She looked up at him. "That's the first time anyone's ever said that to me." He didn't answer, just reached out and tucked a curl behind her ear, rough fingers brushing her temple. She leaned into the touch without thinking. That evening, they lit the fire early and brought supper inside. Cullen read aloud from an old book of fables while Magnolia stitched a new hem on the curtains and Yates carved a broken bridle strap into kindling. "Think we could plant corn next year?" Cullen asked, pausing between passages. Yates glanced toward the window. "Soil's light, but if we add ash and compost, it'll hold." Magnolia threaded her needle again. "We'll need a scarecrow." Cullen grinned. "I'll make one that looks like Sheriff Dobbins." Yates chuckled, low and dry. "That might just keep every crow in the territory away." Later, after the hearth burned low and Cullen snored soft on his cot, Magnolia stepped out onto the porch. The moon laid silver across the paddock, and the wind teased the dry grass beside the steps. Yates stood beside her, arms folded. "You missed the road?" he asked. She shook her head. "I thought I would, but I've never had anything worth staying for before." He studied her for a long moment. "I want to marry you." She blinked, lips parting. "Now?" "Not this minute, but soon. No fuss. Just us and Cullen and Reverend Beck. Maybe a pie if you're feeling generous." She laughed, the sound quieter than her usual, but warm. "You're sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She reached up and touched his jaw, thumb brushing his cheek. "Then yes, I'll marry you." They stood there, the two of them wrapped in wool and firelight, the wind cool but not cruel. She leaned into him, and his arm came around her waist like it belonged there. A week later, they married under the cottonwood behind the house, Cullen holding the ring in an old tobacco tin and Reverend Beck reading from a Bible worn smooth by the desert sun. Magnolia wore the blue calico she'd saved from her mother's chest, and Yates wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff and hands shaking just enough to show he meant every word. They planted winter clover in the pasture that same afternoon. Come spring, the corn rows stretched neat beside the coop, and Cullen's scarecrow leaned crooked but proud, arms out like he meant to hold the whole sky. Magnolia sang again on Fridays, but always came home before the moon climbed too high. Yates kept building new shelves, a smokehouse, a second stall for the mare due to foal. He still didn't speak much, but when he did, it was soft and certain and always just enough. And every night, when the fire burned low and the porch creaked beneath their feet, Magnolia took his hand and held it like a promise already kept. They never needed to say it out loud, not once, because love, real and rooted, had already taken hold of the land beneath them and would not let go.